Today is part 1 of upcycling our Ludo game in true money for nothing style. My name is Charlotte Allen and you have reached my channel, The Felting Alchemist. So a couple of days ago I asked you guys to choose something for me to upcycle, and the majority of you went with this Ludo game, which I think is from like the 1960s or something like that. Now I've had a bit of a think about what I'm going to do with this, and I think the best thing to do is to create some form of sculpture on a stand whereby I've got some little mice playing Ludo, and then maybe have one cheating and make it almost like a bit of a kind of like a diorama-y kind of sculpture with the Ludo game incorporated into it. So I've also made the decision to incorporate the 2 wooden blocks as well into this challenge, and these were one of the options that you could choose for me to upcycle, but I think I'm actually going to use these in this sculpture with the Ludo game. Now, because I don't make life easy for myself, these wooden blocks are completely different looking and they're completely different sizes, but I'm going to work with what I've got, and I'm sure I'll be able to come up with some kind of way around making these 2 things match that really don't match at the moment. So in terms of the Ludo game, so I've got all these lovely pieces here, and I showed you the other day. So I've got the little dice shaker, so I'm definitely going to use that. And it's even got these tiny little dice, which are the perfect size for a tiny mouse to hold. So I think I'm going to use the dice shaker, but I'm not actually going to put the dice inside it, because if I put the dice inside, they kind of get lost because it's a bit too deep and you'll miss it in the sculpture. So I think I'm going to have the dice either in like the hand of a mouse, or I'm going to have them already on the board like this. And then I've also got my little counters as well. So I'm definitely going to use some of these. Now I have a confession to make. I have absolutely no idea what the rules of Ludo are. I don't know how you play the game at all. So I do probably need to read the instructions so I can set it up like a proper Ludo game, as opposed to kind of blagging it and guessing it, because you can guarantee that somebody will look at it and be like, that's not how you play Ludo. So I'm going to have a little read of those instructions so I can set it up properly. And then in terms of the box, because I really want to have the box as part of the sculpture, I think I'm going to have it as a little seat. So one of the mice could maybe sit on the box, or maybe have it slightly open with a few counters inside, like so. I'm not really sure yet. I like the idea of it being a seat, but the only downside to that is then you're kind of incorporating super glue onto something that's really beautiful looking on the front. I don't know how I feel about that. Unless I separate it and have 2 pieces, and have one as the seat and then one maybe stood up like that, so you can kind of see it's a Ludo game, or like that on the side. I don't really know. I'm going to have a play with that and see what looks best. But I've got all my bits and pieces here. I've got my wooden blocks. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start creating some tiny mice. And I think I'm going to create some childlike mice, because everybody associates sort of those kind of old vintage board games with maybe a family playing them and children playing them, and definitely no fighting and falling out over who the winner is. So definitely not like my house. So I'm going to create some small mice, probably just 2, and make them super tiny. So I'm going to go to my floristry wire. So I've got 2 pieces of floristry wire here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to cut them in half. And these 4 pieces that I now have, they're going to be the structure for my 2 baby mice. So I'm going to take the first one, I'm going to fold it in half, like I would do with a normal armature. But we're making it on a much smaller scale. So I'm only going to make the head, the twist for the head, probably about 1 centimetre. So something like that. So really tiny. And then I'm going to fold the second piece in half. And then I'm going to place it over the neck of where I've just twisted. And I'm going to fold these over for 4 counts over on the legs. So 1, 2, 3, 4, like so. And if you want to see how I make my wire armatures in detail, there's a video here which you can watch, and it shows you exactly how I make them. So I'm doing it quite quickly today, but that's effectively how you make a wire armature. So I'm doing it quite quickly today, but this is how I make my wire armatures normally. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to twist 1 wire over the other, and then I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, is that going to be big enough? Yeah, 3 twists, like so. So I've got my legs and I've got my arms. I'm going to keep my legs quite long, because what I want to do is I want to have them sat up. So I want to have their legs kind of akimbo like this, like they're sat playing the card game. So I'm going to keep those at the length they are. The only thing I'm going to do is probably just trim this one because it's a bit longer than the other. And then I'm going to fold over my legs. Hello, Freya.
Do you want to see this?
Oh, wow, that's beautiful. Really lovely, sweetie. I love that. Do you want me to show the camera so everybody else can see? Mm-hmm. Look at that. Freya's drawn a beautiful rainbow. And you've used your special pastels chalks, haven't you, to do that? Very good. Now show them your hands. I think you might need to wash your hands, beautiful. Very good. I'm going to leave that. I'm going to put that down here, Freya, okay? She wants to be an artist, so she's using all the different types of materials that you can use to create pictures. So we're using pastels today, bless her. So I'm just going to fold over this other foot so we haven't got any sharp points. And then I'm just going to look at the arms and I'm going to trim his arms because his arms at the moment are actually longer than the legs, so he's not really in proportion. So I'm going to trim those so they kind of reach about where the knee would be roughly. So his arms are looking a little bit more in proportion, and then we're just going to fold up those sharp points. I think this is like a 22 gauge, this floristry wire, so it can be a bit stiff sometimes. There we go. And then the final thing to do is add his tail. So what I'm just going to do is going to take a fresh piece of wire. I'm just going to trim a length. And then I'm just going to wrap that around the torso of my mouse. So I'm just going to take this just past where we have this triangular shape here. It's just going to be placed around here. And if you've seen my needle felted mouse tutorial, you'll see exactly how I do this. So it's definitely worth watching that. And then I'm just going to wrap this around the body nice and tightly. And then when I get to the end, the sort of where the bottom will be, I'm just going to fold that bit around there. Ooh, it's tight on my fingers. And then I'm just going to fold that sharp bit in for the tail. And then I'm just going to make exactly the same size armature for my other mouse. So I will see you in a moment when I finish that one. Okay, so I've got my 2 mouse armatures that I've made, and they're teeny tiny little mouse armatures. So what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to rub some needle felting wax all over the wire. And this is one that I make and I sell it in my shop, in my Etsy shop, Little Bushka. And I'll pop a link below in case any of you guys want to try it out, because it's a nice sticky wax. So it really helps the wool to stick when you've got this kind of wire armature that's got quite a lot of slick to it. So when you're trying to wrap the wool around it, it can slip and slide quite a bit. Whereas this kind of keeps it into contact with the wire and sticks it down quite nicely, which is why I quite like to use it. And I even use this with luxury pipe cleaners as well, because I just find it makes life a lot easier when it comes to getting that wool and getting the wool to grip onto the wire that you're using for the armature. So once I've covered all the limbs of my armature with the wax, I'm then going to take some pink wool bats. And again, if you just refer to my needle felted mouse tutorial, you'll see exactly all the materials that you need for this. We're just doing it on a much smaller scale here. So we're kind of halving the size of our mouse. But on that tutorial, which is just up there, you can click on that and it'll take you through step by step exactly what you need to do. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a small section of the pink wool bats, and then I'm just going to start wrapping it around what will be the arm of one of our mice. So I'm holding it very closely to the wire and wrapping it very tightly and ensuring that it's not twisting, because the moment it starts twisting is when you get an uneven finish with your sculpture. So you really want to make sure that it's nice and straight. And what a lot of people have said to me, and a few issues people have been having, is when we have the kind of the ends of the wire exposed. So the trick that I use to stop this from happening is to take my wool bats all the way down past the end of the wire, so it's going past, so the wool's going past the wire, and then bringing it back over. And what you'll find is you'll get this kind of like a loop, I guess, or kind of a little bit of additional wool that kind of covers the tip, and it just creates a much smoother finish and hides that piece of kind of metal armature at the end. I'm just going to go back over it one more time, take the wool past, and then wrap it back upwards. So I've got my first little handmade, like so. And then I'm going to do the same thing with all the other limbs. So I'll be back in a second once they're all wrapped. Okay, so once I've wrapped all of my limbs with the pink wool bats, what we're going to do next is use some core wool. So I'm going to use some white Shetland core wool here, and we're just going to add a bit more bulk to some of our limbs. So we're going to also wrap the torso of the mouse and wrap the head, just to create a base so that when we add the panels later on, we've got something to felt against. So I'm going to get my white Shetland wool. And the nice thing with working with such a small frame is you don't need really long pieces of the wool to wrap around the body, unlike in my previous mouse tutorial where we were making a much larger mouse. So I'm going to halve this because we don't need loads and loads, we only need very small amounts. And then I'm just going to do the arms first. So I'm just going to, again, the same technique that I used a moment ago when I was wrapping the pink merino wool bats around the hands of the mouse. I'm wrapping the white Shetland core wool all the way down to probably about 1/2 centimetre. So you've got 1/2 centimetre of the mouse's hand exposed there. And then I'm just going to go back upwards. We're not going to add too much bulk yet because we want to kind of gauge how big the rest of the mouse is going to be. So we're just putting in a preliminary layer at the moment, and then when we've added everything else, then we can add some more wool in if we need to. And I'm just going to anchor this round the neck of our mouse so it doesn't come undone. And then the same thing on the other arm. So I'm just pulling probably about a couple of inches of excess just over the shoulder, just so I've got something to hold on to. And then I'm just going to again wrap this around the arm of my mouse, all the way down to where the hand is, leaving about 1/2 centimetre exposed, and then back up again, all the way to the top. And it's really nice making these small creations because I think it just adds to the magic and whimsy of what we're making. I really like to make them look as realistic as possible. So we've got the arms wrapped. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing with the legs now. So I'm just going to wrap some around his legs. Don't need loads and loads. And again, I'm just going to anchor probably about 1/2 inch just over the belly area. And then I'm just going to wrap the rest around the leg. And then all the way back up again. And like I said before, we can add some more in later on, but we want to keep the bulk of the wool up here because this is going to be his thigh. So we want it to be relatively chunky. That's that one done, and then just do the same on the other side. I want him to be a little chunky rotund mouse, like Gus from Cinderella, a little bit tubby, like he needs to go on a bit of a COVID diet is what he's going to look like. He's been stuck inside for too long, playing Ludo, eating cheese, getting a bit chunky. Here we go. So the legs have been wrapped, the arms have been wrapped. So the next thing I'm going to do is wrap his torso. So I'm going to go back to the white Shetland, and I'm just going to take a relatively long piece like so. I'm going to start at the bottom, so where the mouse tail starts. And again, I'm just going to anchor this excess bit here just over the tail. And then we're going to wrap it around his body. So I'm just going to wrap this over the mouse's shoulder, then it's going to go back round the top of the chest, and then wrap it round the body again, back over the shoulder again, and then I'm just going to wrap that round, and it's just creating that kind of shoulder area for our mouse. Don't worry if it's a little bit lumpy at the moment, we'll get rid of that later on. Just get rid of those excess pieces. And the very last thing to wrap is this kind of neck area here, which is eventually going to have his head on. So I'm going to get a bit more of the Shetland wool. Don't need very much. Again, I'm just going to take a piece just underneath his arm now, anchor it into position. And we've already wrapped quite a bit of wool around this area where we've had our excess pieces, so we don't need lots. But again, it's just to give ourselves a little bit of a surface area to attach some panels to later on. I'm just going to felt that down so it can't unravel. How big he is in comparison to the Ludo game. I'm happy with that, it looks about right. He's going to have a bit more bulk added to him later anyway, so he is going to look a bit larger than this, but this is the sort of the general size of what he will be in the end. Okay, so that was the very first part of upcycling our Ludo game. So we've worked out what we're going to do with the Ludo game. We've also incorporated some other vintage items, well they're not really vintage, some blocks of wood into the sculpture as well. And we've started making our mice. So we've wrapped our mouse's body now, so we've got a nice base to add the bulk to our mouse. So in the second part, when I see you tomorrow, we're going to be adding the bulk, making our mouse look super duper cute, well both of them. And then once they're finished, we're going to be incorporating them into the game. So I will see you tomorrow when we do the second part. In the meantime, have a wonderful day and I will see you very, very soon. Bye.